at blacks, because Woodrow Wilson, this progressive, was a nightmare when it came to African Americans, an absolute nightmare. You know, I don't need to get into
Coolidge. When Coolidge is Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts, he gives a talk, and he's talking about the war, and he says the German government has been knocking us, and they've been knocking the fact that we have colored troops in Europe fighting alongside in other units with us. And I would hope that when we finally accept the surrender of the Kaiser's government, we will have a contingent of colored troops around. When he was running for office in 1924, he didn't really speak out against the Klan, but what he did was he went and spoke to the B'nai B'rith. He went to spoke to the Knights of Columbus, and he delivered a graduating address at the all-black Howard University. When he goes and dedicates the World War I memorial in Kansas City, which is a very southern-like town, he insists that a detachment of black troops from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, accompany him.
Which, again, is a complete reversal of Woodrow Wilson. The term, I keep passing over Harding, and Harding was important, but Coolidge was Harding's vice president.
Right.
And Harding dies in office, and didn't his father swear Coolidge in?
Absolutely. When Harding dies, he's on a Great Western trip. He's up in Alaska. He comes down to California. He takes ill, dies after a few days of being holed up in a hotel room in San Francisco. They bring the news to Calvin Coolidge. And as I said earlier, he comes from this little town in Vermont, Plymouth Notch. And the place is so isolated, there's no phone. The Vice President of the United States is vacationing there with his father on the old homestead. They have to drive 10 to 12 miles to get to the place at 1 in the morning to let the Vice President know he's going to be the President of the United States. They swear him in because he says he's a very practical man. He says, we can't go without a president very long. Who can do this? My father's a notary. My father's a notary. He calls the Department of State. Can a notary do it? Yes. And they eventually do it again, just in case. But they do it by kerosene light. There is no electricity, no phone at this place.
This is really important that it's kerosene light, and I'll explain why. And I think it will give you a little hope on what we're facing today. We see the parallels on the setup, and remember, kerosene lamps. I'll give that to you next. We're talking about one of my favorite U.S. presidents, Calvin Coolidge. This is a seat cushion. Oh, there's some presidents' faces that belong, well, never mind. No, it's not. I was going to say that's beneath me, but really it's not. We want to talk about Calvin Coolidge, and if you want to learn more about him after this show, log on to glennbeck.com and sign up for the Insider Extreme account. We have a brand new special posted on the website today called The Truth About Calvin Coolidge. It's at glennbeck.com. Do it now. We're back with Calvin Coolidge biographers, David Petrucia and also Amity Schlaze. And I want to talk here where we left it off. I think everybody has the point that it's a lot like today. When he comes into office, it's a lot like today, and people are freaking out. You got this gigantic government going completely in the other direction, and then Calvin Coolidge is brought in.
Well, actually Harding. Harding, and the taxes are cut under Harding, like from 70 to 56%, and then Coolidge ratchets it up even more.
And there's another guy named Mellon that's involved. He's the Treasury
Andrew J.
Right, and he's the Carnegie Mellon guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also then later vilified and persecuted under FDR. Seriously persecuted under FDR. But he comes in, and he's kind of the genius behind it all, and he says, you got to cut taxes, you got to cut spending. They do a little bit. They do quite a bit, actually. And things start to move in the right direction, right?
They really do. You know, unemployment is 3.3% during Coolidge's 6 years. The gross national product increases by 7%. Per capita income grows by 30%.
Well,
Real earnings
before we get
up by 22%.
But I think the point to make here is that it wasn't easy for Mellon and Coolidge and Harding before to get these tax cuts through. We think of it as obvious, and now it's impossible. But they worked very hard. They wrote books, they sold them to people. And recall, at that time, most people didn't pay the income tax. So they were voting for tax cuts for rich people. And that's a very hard sell for politicians. And nonetheless, it worked because Mellon and Coolidge actually believed in trickle-down. If the rich people paid less tax, they would invest more, and there would be more jobs for regular people.
Go back a little bit.
It actually worked.
Go back a little bit and explain that, because now 50% of the country doesn't pay income tax. They actually get money back. What was the percentage that really was being hit hard?
Well, Glenn, even fewer people paid income tax then.
Right.
And that's why it was said to be impossible to cut the income tax on the rich people that Wilson...
And they had vilified, under Wilson, they had just vilified the rich, just exactly what's happening again now.
Yeah, but when you lower the taxes, or when you actually get the rich paying more, oddly enough, because when they lower those rates in 1920, 15.4% of all personal income taxes are paid by those paying $5,000 a year or less. And when Coolidge leaves office in 1929, that's down to 0.4%. When he leaves office, 98% of all the people are no longer paying federal income taxes. They've been removed from the rolls. And the rich are actually the fat cats, those earning over $50,000 or $100,000 a year. Their percentage of bearing the burden actually almost doubles.
Okay, so now we have them making a case that it's actually good. Do you guys either remember a really good sell? I mean,
yes,
really
well,
good speech where
Mellon wrote a book which was written with S. Parker Gilbert, his wise advisor, his art laugher, called Taxation: The People's Business, making the case that poor people should care about high taxes because of jobs that weren't created when taxes were too high. And he went out and stumped, and Coolidge went out and stumped. So if you go back, you see a sustained campaign over several years, and the tax rate was brought down to 25, which is a low for us. Even Reagan did not get down to 25, low for us in our history, but not right away. What's important for us to know is it was several years of legislative work before they got there.
Okay. Now, the result, and this is why I said it's important for you to know, when Coolidge was sworn into office, he wasn't near a phone. He was sworn in by lamplight. Most people didn't have a car. The phones were still unique. Air conditioning, all of this stuff was very unique. But something happened. It's in our history books, it's just treated as a magical event. All of a sudden, people got greedy and rich. The Roaring Twenties. And that's really, would you say, raise your hand if you think that we teach the Roaring Twenties, or we view the Roaring Twenties, unless you start to do your homework, as a time that just magically happened, and people got greedy, and they were all rich, and they were all flappers, and they all went to the Great Gatsby house, and then it crashed, right? Is that what you'd say, what we all learn now? Okay. So that's pretty much it. The Roaring Twenties just didn't happen because of the government. They happened because the government withdrew. Now, what happened in those...
Coolidge does not create that prosperity. Coolidge lets the people create the prosperity.
Correct.
And that's always the key.
Harding starts it, and then Coolidge really cements it with Mellon.
Yeah, he's single-minded. As Amity says, he's absolutely single-minded on
By
that.
the time he leaves office, tell me now what the country is like. Before, it's nobody has cars, nobody has anything.
3 times as many cars.
3 times as many cars.
And
electricity in half the country.
Hold on just a second. Let me take a quick break, because I want to go into some of these stats, because I don't think America can understand the common man prosperity that came out of the Roaring Twenties. We'll give that to you next.
Hot Heartbeat, fire in the middle. Heartbeat, warm as griddle. Heartbeat, sizzling soup. Oh, what will I do?
The Roaring '20s. When we think of the Roaring '20s, we think of, well, that, really. We think of people that are just living this strange high life. We think of the Great Gatsby, where people don't have any concept of reality. And then the crash. That's not exactly true. Back with us is David Petruzza. He is the author and historian and author of Silent Cal's Almanac, and also great book 1920. Amity Schley, senior fellow at the Council of Foreign Relations and contributing writer to a new book, Why Coolidge Matters. She's also writing a biography on Coolidge, and she's also the author of a great book. How many years has this been out now?
2007.
2007, Forgotten Man. It's a fantastic book. Okay. So, we're left now with the Roaring '20s. They cut all of the spending. They not only reduce taxes, but he reduces the spending by at least half, does he not?
Roughly.
Roughly, about half.
And he reduces the national debt.
Okay. So he is totally transforming America back to closer to where our founders...
Fiscal solvency and getting out of the way so that the government can, that the economy can grow.
All right. Now, we were talking about how this transformed. You don't have to think about the Great Gatsby. Let's think about how the lives of average Americans changed. And the lives of average Americans, 1920, nobody really has a car. By the time he leaves office, 3 times the amount of people, there are 3 times the amount of cars on the road, which was an expensive item. It's not that the price of cars necessarily just came just dropping through the floor in price, but it was that people made money, more money, right?
Right.
Right.
Tell me what happened to incomes. Tell me what did the average person in the 1920s?
Well, you hear a lot about incomes. Real incomes went up. And what's very interesting about the 20s is they didn't have inflation. They had low unemployment. The unemployment politely stayed below 5% in Coolidge's time. It was in the 3s in Coolidge's time. And yet there was no inflation to speak of. And nowadays economists say that's impossible, right? You hear, oh, the economy will heat up and so on. So it was a golden time when people earned more and their money was worth more. And in addition to the cars, their houses were electrified. So that meant for women especially, housework changed. Women could turn to other things. They didn't have to rub washboards all day. We're doing the cartoon Coolidge right now, and we have lots of drawings of women rubbing washboards, and the drudgery of the day that they experienced, hours and hours to bake, to iron, that ended with the appliance came into the home, and that was Coolidge.
Which is a very big deal, and that led really to some of this euphoria of, I mean, this was the first time that anyone in the history of the world that was an average person was able to have real leisure time.
They could, and radio comes in, the movies are more and more popular. The average work week decreases by 4%, which when people are working 6 days a week and are trying to get that down, that's a good thing as opposed to it being down 4 or 10% in 2010. And the funding and things which Coolidge talks about, we are not just having wealth for wealth. We want to have wealth for education, for charity, for culture. These are the things which really speak to civilization.
Encouraging that to happen
at the state level.
At the state level.
Which is education spending increases in the 1920s 4 times. Now, there's no federal money. There's no genius on the Potomac doing this. It's the people in school districts and at the state level doing it, and they're getting the job done in a wonderful way, and illiteracy falls by half in that decade.
Okay. We're going to stop here, and we're going to take a break, and then we're going to take you from 1927 to the Great Depression. What happened? It was going well. Is it that we had too small of a government? Back in just a second.